Welcome to PodJunction, where business meets podcasting. Whether you're on a morning jog, driving to work, whipping up a meal, or just taking a moment for yourself, our weekly bite-sized episodes promise fresh insights from successful podcasters who have cracked the code of using podcasts to grow their business. So whether you're a podcasting newbie or seasoned podcaster, grab your notebooks and get ready.
Well, hello, welcome to PodJunction. My name is Matt Edmondson. Beside me is the debonair, the handsome, the stunningly amazing person, which is Sadaf Bainon. Welcome to the show. Great to have you here. And we were talking before. You need to give me a list of words that I can use to describe
adjectives.
Approved adjectives. Approvedadjectives.com. Were they off the list? Because I was just kind of winging that.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, good. Yeah. So welcome to the show. This is a show all about using podcasting to grow your business and whatever that means and looks like. We're going to talk about all kinds of different things. And the format of the show is pretty straightforward, pretty simple. We listen to an excerpt of an interview with an expert in their field, someone who is actually podcasting for their business, using podcasting to grow their business. And then Sadaf and I will listen to that said interview clip, just as you are doing. I have my notebook, I have my pens. Go grab your notebook, grab your pen, take lots of notes, and then we're going to have a conversation about that afterwards. That's the format. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And today's guest is, drumroll please. No expense spared in the sound effects. Today's guest is?
It is Tim Richardson from Your Basket is Empty.
Yeah, Tim. What a legend that guy is. Tim is, he's a great guy. I met Tim, I was saying in this story, wasn't I? Met Tim a few years ago when Chloe Thomas, who is also going to come on this show, also does e-commerce podcasting. So there's a few of us who do e-commerce podcasts. And Chloe decided a little while ago that actually she's going to get everyone together. And so that's where I met Tim, was at this sort of get together down in London. We were on a boat having a meal, which was, I think we were on a boat. And we had this meal, got to know each other. And Tim was one of the guys I got to meet and know. And we chatted long and hard about podcasting. He is such an awesome guy. And so, yes, very, very stoked he is on the show. What's he talking about?
He is talking about sponsorship. So I'll let him talk.
Yeah, don't steal his thunder.
Sorry, Tim.
Okay, so let's get the guest on quick before Sadaf tells you everything, and then we'll be back after this. Here we go.
I'm intrigued by this idea that actually when you started it, you weren't looking to commercialize the podcast. But the consequence of doing the podcast has led to some commercialization, people approaching you to sponsor the podcast and so on and so forth. So how have you, do you have sponsors for every episode? I'm curious to see what your experience with sponsorship is.
So I think first and foremost, before we get into it, my job was commercial director. I've been a salesperson for a very long time. So I didn't find it that hard to get sponsorship because that's what I do and that's what I teach people now. So,
right.
So in terms of getting the sponsorship, it wasn't that difficult because that's what I do. In terms of maybe some thoughts about sponsorship, I do believe the way in which I started it is an interesting, and sorry, my washing machine might be going off in the background there. It is an
well,
interesting
at least your clothes are clean.
Yeah, at least my clothes are clean. I think starting it from a place of non-commercialization is an interesting spot to begin with, because then you're not thinking about money. You're just thinking about the quality of the guests, the type of conversations you're going to be having, and ultimately what the user, the listener, gets. And that has always been my number one focus. Is I want it to be an entertaining, insightful, and thoughtful conversation between two interesting people that it's a very selfish endeavor, I would want to listen to. That's literally the main objective of all the content I put out, but especially the podcast. So if you can then attract sponsors on top of that, I think it's kind of a win-win. But I would encourage people to think about that first point, and I appreciate that is difficult if it's part of, again, your business, maybe not a satellite thing, and you need it, or it is one of your key growth, channels or levers. Now, to your question about like generally approaching sponsors and how I've done that, I've experimented. So I started off with weekly episodes and building some sort of kind of like sponsorship or partnership package that kind of like facilitated that. And I personally found that quite taxing. Like a podcast episode every week is quite full on. And I think I found because it was every week, I noticed that the quality sort of started to dilute slightly because it was so taxing, and I kind of just needed people on the pod. I couldn't be so strategic about it. So I then totally switched gears and went to another model, which is something I think people should consider if they're looking to commercialize it. And that was breaking it out into a series. So I did a 6-part series. I had a theme that wrapped the series. And that was a perfect little package to go to a sponsor and say, look, here's the series. You can have somebody on within that 6 episodes. I'm happy to talk to your CMO or your founder. They can take 1 episode. So then there's 5 for us to talk about, to have guests on. The guests can be their customers or potential customers. And, it's a nice, neat little package. And I found that worked really, really well. And so I experimented with that in terms of sponsorship, and there was a lot of interest in that. And I managed to commercialize all of the series that I did. And that was throughout kind of like 2021 and 2020. And I got to do a few different sort of subjects, but I'm quite passionate about food. So I did a whole series on direct consumer food. And weirdly, I got approached by like the founder of Food 52, who's a massive big deal. And like she was on the pod. And like was the first time I was nervous on the pod. But so that was a cool thing. I did a whole series on agencies, which is slightly ironic now because I'm pivoting into focusing on agencies. And then I would sort of like look at things like up and coming brands that people may not have heard of, and it's kind of a nice way to expose them. So the series based concept was good, but upon reflection, what I realized is that it impacted the numbers quite badly, in the sense that you'd get a lot of listenership, and then when you're not posting anything or producing any new episodes, the listenership kind of like dwindles. So going into 2023 and kind of the back end of last year, I'm sort of going halfway house. It's a monthly content sort of experience. It's 2 podcasts, 2 newsletters every single month. And in terms of commercialization, I'm looking at sponsorships either on a 1, 3, 6 or 12 month kind of package. And to make it commercially interesting for sponsors, the price reduces the more you take out. That's a fair deal. And then if you want to take out the full year, then it's kind of like a custom arrangement. So that's my general TLDR on sponsorship and what I've learned. But yeah, it hasn't really been a ball ache, if I'm totally honest, because I do a lot of this stuff with my work anyway. So it just flows into the workflow.
And if it's one of those interesting things, isn't it? If you've got the network and you've got the contacts and sponsorship makes sense, then have at it. It's interesting. You talked about at the start you're trying to do that for every episode, and it sort of impacted the quality of your podcast because you then have to focus on your sponsors as well as on your guest types of things. So sponsorship. The outlook for 2023, have you found it more tricky, more difficult, or is it still pretty straightforward?
On my list today is to reach out to all of my potential partners for this year. So I'll let you know in a week's time. My general sense is I think it would be unwise anyone going to look for any kind of like marketing sponsorship from anyone, that's across the board, no matter what you're doing, and not realize that things are going to be impacted with the general economic climate. So I'm certainly okay that I'm going to have to either negotiate. I'm also totally fine that I don't have a sponsor at all, because ultimately it is, as you said, it's a lead generation tool. It's a authority tool. I like having the conversations. The fact that I get to commercialize it is kind of like the cherry on top. But I would say anyone looking to drive sponsorship for any type of content, that it will be more challenging. So therefore, maybe some things to consider are work with people that you already know. And I think that's one thing that I've certainly been very clear on with any of my partners in terms of sponsorship is I want to like totally believe in their product or their service or whatever it is. I'm not quite interested in I'd rather not have a sponsor than hawk something I really don't like, or it does not match my brand. And I think that's probably something that's useful, in terms of people considering sponsorship or commercializing it.
If you're intrigued and want to dive deeper into this conversation, check out PodJunction Cohort, where you can listen to the complete interview and much more. Simply visit thepodjunction.com for more information about how to join.
Welcome back from that conversation with Tim. I love that conversation, that whole thing about sponsorship, predominantly because we've never really done the sponsorship thing, have we, on any of our shows? We do get approached by people who want to sponsor an episode or look at sponsoring the show.
Yeah.
But we've never actively gone out and said, hey, would you like to sponsor the e-commerce podcast, the Push podcast or whatever? Because we've used it predominantly as, Push is predominantly a lead generation tool.
Yeah.
And the e-commerce podcast, when we started, I think we mentioned before on the show, when we started that, I haven't really got a clue what we were doing.
Just having fun.
Just having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
But we've never tried to actively commercialize it with sponsors. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
But we've never really done anything about it. So I found this conversation with Tim really interesting because my brain started buzzing. It's like, oh, we could do this, we could do that, we could do the other. But yeah, what did you get? What was your thoughts on what Tim said?
I think I find the whole sponsorship thing a little bit daunting, if I'm honest. And I like that he said that it's, he's got a sales background, and so therefore it made it easier for him.
Yeah.
So I don't have a sales background, so maybe that's why.
Maybe.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? How do you approach people to sponsor the show? A couple of things that Tim said, which I thought were interesting. One, he said, talk to people that you know from your network. Two, I think understand the climate. So at the time of recording, interest rates are high, the economy is in recession, the cost of living crisis, we've got the Russia-Ukraine war. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. And so I think people have pulled back from it. And there's been a lot of high-profile cases like, the Duchess and Duke of Sussex and their podcast deal with Spotify not being renewed yet for a second season. Despite Spotify throwing copious amounts of money into podcasting. So I know that quite a few other people that rely on sponsorship for podcasting have found it hard this year because the money has dried up, for want of a better expression, as everyone's pulled back to conserve cash, which you can understand. But one of the things that he said at the start was a bit like we did with e-commerce podcast. We never set out to commercialize the podcast. We just wanted to have great conversations with interesting people, grow our authority, connect, do you know what I mean? Do all those kind of things that, is associated with podcasting. Credibility, authority, meet interesting people, meaningful connections, et cetera, et cetera. I never once thought, I wonder if I could get Klaviyo to sponsor the show and pay me copious amounts of money to sit and chat to people. And so what's fascinating with that is I think that seems, certainly for Tim and certainly for us at EP, that seemed to direct quite heavily the way the podcast went when we launched it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like all the things that we didn't do to try and satisfy our show sponsor.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Because I guess if you have a list of sponsors, you suddenly have stakeholders, don't you? And like you say, you have to satisfy them. Whereas we had the freedom to be able to just, as you say, have great conversations and be focused on our guest and our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I can get a sponsor that is happy with that, then great. Come talk to me. I would love to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
We have had people approach us to sponsor the show. I remember one chap who just started an agency. If I could remember his name, I still wouldn't tell you, but I can't remember his name or the agency's name. I just remember him. Do you remember he contacted us and said, I'm interested in sponsoring the show. And I felt the need to say to him that, listen, sponsoring the e-commerce podcast, whilst I'm happy to have a conversation, because a few people have sponsored the show, whilst I'm happy to have the conversation, I need you to understand this is not going to guarantee you clients. Because I think understanding that podcasting is more top of funnel. It's more about awareness. Just putting your name out there on the e-commerce podcast. Yes, we get thousands of people download it. Thousands of people aren't going to want to buy a website right now. You may not get any leads from this at all. And so, and if you're going to do it, just doing one episode is not going to really help you. You're going to have to get behind like Tim, I thought it was clever because he did the series, or
Yeah.
he's now, you sponsor a month or 6 months or whatever, and he's doing those packages. Because I think if you're going to do some kind of sponsorship, you have to be in for the long haul to get some kind of brand recognition.
Yeah.
And so finding companies that will do that, that will sponsor it like that, is it's not always that straightforward.
Yeah. Yeah.
But be aware, and be totally honest with people that want to sponsor the podcast. Give them a reality check. This is, yes, we have this many listeners, but that doesn't equate to that many people going to buy.
Yeah.
It's a bit like running a TV advert once. It's not going to have the impact. It's the constancy, isn't it? The repetitive nature of it. And so structuring sponsorships around that, I think, will be much better for the client, whoever's sponsoring your show, and for you, because over a period of time, they may see the results. But I think in one episode, they probably won't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? What do you think to this idea of doing a series that a sponsor could get connected with?
I thought that was actually quite clever, because he was saying, I think one of them was it cooking or something?
Food.
Yeah, food based. So I think if you're doing different series, there's your the sponsors that you might be going after. It just opens up the pool so much more, instead of if you're just e-commerce focused. I think that could get saturated. I don't know. We don't really do sponsorship. So, but if you're opening up the pool to different topics, then obviously you'll get more people in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
like. I know other podcasters who have done that well. So, for example, on the e-commerce podcast, I could do like an 8-week series on email marketing. I could approach companies that are involved in email marketing, for example, brands like Klaviyo, Aweber, and some of the other ones that are totally escaping my head right now. But I could go to those email providers and say, listen, we're going to do this series. Do you want to sponsor that series? And I like what Tim said. And if you do, we'd love to have you fill out one of the guest slots on the show. Here are some of the other things that I'm thinking of covering, but I'm happy to have a conversation if you want to do this slightly differently. But this comes back again to, now you've got a sponsor, you've got to make it worth their while in terms of the content. So you start to, whereas I like it at the moment because I can have whatever conversation I like with whatever person I like. That's not to say I'd be averse to that kind of thing, but I think there are complications that come with it that you just need to be aware of. And as long as you're happy with that, then that's fine. But yeah, I like the idea of doing a series. But of course, Tim's quite rightly said the downside of that is, and this is what we discovered with e-commerce podcast, was we would do a series. Eventually, a series became 10 episodes because it just that's the way it was. We would do a series, then we'd have a break for 4 or 5 weeks, and then we'd start another series. And the listenership, the numbers would drop radically, and so you'd spend all the next series trying to rebuild them, and then they'd drop again. So what we found is doing a podcast every week, that consistency, which we've talked about before, the numbers continually grow as opposed to do this all the time, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And so the downside of the series thing is, if you've not got back-to-back series planned, you could create this effect of sort of driving numbers and having numbers fall off. So one of the other things, by the way, that's just totally come to my mind. I know some other podcasters who will say to sponsors that every penny that you pay in sponsorship, we will put into marketing of the podcast. And so it's not like the money's getting lost in a black hole. So we will take that sponsorship money. So let's say they sponsor, I don't know, a couple of grand for a series or something. We're going to take that money and we're going to invest that into some kind of, say, paid media or promotional activity for the podcast to drive the numbers. That kind of sweetens the deal, which is good. You can do that, obviously, if your income is not necessary on the podcast sponsorship. And I know that a lot of podcasters whose income is totally reliant on sponsorship. But that is just another sweet way to, which I've come across before and thought was quite clever. But yes. So yeah, if you are creating a full-time income from sponsoring a podcast, God bless you, because that's not an easy road to go down. It really isn't. And I think you've got to have big audiences to generate the cash. What you've got to do with a podcast is look beyond the sponsorship. It's a bit like YouTube, you've got to look beyond just the money you get from ad generation. What other things can you do to create income? And sponsorship works for some people. For a lot of others, they find it really quite difficult. So I think when you're doing your podcast, create multiple streams of income from it. We'll talk more about that in upcoming episodes, I have no doubt. But yeah, something to be aware of. And then finally, probably the only other thing to say is your biggest sponsor of the show should probably be yourself. And so this is what we do, right? Yeah. We sponsor our own shows, which is why I've never been that bothered about going and getting sponsors, because this show, the e-commerce podcast, is brought to you by E-commerce Cohort. E-commerce Cohort is a monthly mastermind group that you can join from $14.99 and gives you a backstage pass, blah, 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 right? Yeah. So e-commerce podcast, we promote the e-commerce cohort, which is one of our memberships. This podcast, PodJunction, you will have heard Sadaf talk, that little promo after the interview. If you want to listen to the entire interview, you can listen to the entire interview just by joining the Podcast Junction cohort. More information can be found on our website at podjunction.com. So we, in effect, are sponsoring this show. Now, just because I've put the ad there doesn't mean that 1,000 people are going to sign up tomorrow. Yeah. I wish it did. I genuinely do, but I don't. I've got, like I say, there has to be that consistency, right? So we sponsor our own show. We are a podcast agency. PodJunction is a brand name. We are building that. We are connecting with people. We are letting people know what our services are. So you take someone like Tim who comes on the show. He has a podcast. Well, he now knows that we do podcasting services, right? So ideal. Yeah. Tim's not a client yet, by the way, but do you see what I mean? It's one of those things. So there's lots of other things that we do. So we are, in effect, I would say, our biggest show sponsor. Yeah. And that, I think, is it's probably a nicer way to go for it. Certainly for us. I'm not saying it's the only way to go. Let me just clarify. I think there are other ways to do it. But for us at the moment, that's the strategy that we have taken. For Tim, he gets external sponsorship, so it commercializes podcasts. And if anybody would like to sponsor the PodJunction, please reach out to us, because we would love to talk to you. Or e-commerce podcast, or Push. Push is another podcast. We sponsor that, for want of a better expression. And so again, podcasting for business is more than just getting sponsors. But if that is your strategy, I think it's a really interesting strategy, and hopefully you picked up a few top tips from Tim. But it's not the only strategy to make money, because for years I thought it was, but apparently it isn't. Apparently there are other things that you can do, which we have talked about in this. Anything else from you, Miss Sadaf? I realise I've just talked for quite a while there.
Yes, you have.
I'm just going to do this.
No, I'm looking at my notes, and I think you've covered it all, Matt. I think you got it.
Well done, me. Sorry, I went on a bit of a monologue there. I do like these topics, though, these topics of sponsorship. What have you learned? Let me ask you some questions then. What have you learned dealing with people that have reached out to us wanting to sponsor the show?
What have I learned? I think maybe one of the things I could identify is that would we as a business stand behind that sponsor? Yeah. Like, is that something we would be happy to stand behind? Yeah. I think sometimes you can maybe get caught up in the appeal of it, but I think if we're not happy to stand behind it, I don't think we should be pushing it.
Yeah, that's very true. And that's something that Tim mentioned, wasn't it? That whole idea of being aligned with whoever's sponsoring your show, I think is very, very important. Very, very important. Which again is why we've turned down some sponsors in the past, because it's like, actually I don't feel like I can get behind your brand or what you stand for. Not that I think I'm a better human being, but I think your business and our business is just as on that, for whatever reason, not aligned. And so not being afraid to say no. I think that's important, especially if you don't feel like the sponsor is going to connect with your tribe as well. So if you're using podcasting to build an audience, like we have a podcast, or we're starting a podcast called Rooted with Vegetology. It's an e-commerce business. So there's an e-commerce podcast coming out called Rooted. There is no way on God's green earth I'm getting Swoledale Butchers to sponsor that podcast because its client base is predominantly vegan and vegetarian, right? It's just Susie's Leatherworks. It's just not, it doesn't make sense on any kind of level for them to sponsor that podcast. And so I think you're right. I think that is super important, the values aspect of it, you know, being culturally aligned and it making sense to your listener more than anything is really, really important. I mean, really, really important. Yeah. Super, super powerful point. No, very good. Anything else?
No.
You sure?
Yep, I'm sure.
Okay, you just want to go now because you need to go collect the kids
I
from
do
school.
need to go get the kids.
And on that bombshell, ladies and gentlemen, who have we got coming up next week?
We've got Dennis from Leadership is Changing. And
You can't pronounce his surname.
I can't pronounce, so Matt's going to tell you his full name.
We've got it written down. I do know Dennis. Dennis is a legend from the land down under. And I was on his podcast several years ago. So it's great to get to catch up with Dennis. What did you say he was talking about? I can't read your writing.
Neither can I. The benefits of podcasting.
Yeah, from the Leadership is Changing.
Yes.
Dennis Gianosis, I think is his surname. I hope I pronounced that right. Dennis, I'm really sorry if I haven't. Please forgive me. But looking forward to that with Dennis coming up. Do come and join us as we learn from Dennis. Do make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast, wherever you get your podcast from, because, you know, we've got more conversations coming up. And you know what we haven't been doing on this podcast?
What have we not been doing?
The whole You're Awesome thing.
That's okay.
Do you not want us to do that?
No.
And Sarah's like, this is my show, so we're not doing it.
Move over, Matt.
Obviously, we've not had this conversation before. You'll have no idea what we're talking about unless you've listened to my other podcasts. I have a specific way I sign off every podcast that I do, where I am the host. I have just discovered, after doing this hundreds of times from my show's producer, that she's not a particular fan of the way that we sign off those episodes and does not want it on this show. So if you want to know what I say and what I do, you should probably check out an episode of the e-commerce podcast or Push to Be More because, yes, I'm not allowed to say it on. I've been censored. I want you to know. So on that bombshell, I think it's probably a good time to say ta-ra. So thank you so much for joining us. Bye for now.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode at PodJunction, where business meets podcasting. If you enjoyed the insights from today and wish to hear the full conversation with today's special guest, don't forget to visit thepodjunction.com, where you'll find more information about how you can join today. Whether you listened while on the go or in a quiet moment, thank you for letting us be a part of your day. Remember, every episode is a chance to gain insights and to transform your business with podcasting. So keep tuning in, keep learning, and until next time, happy podcasting.